Have you ever felt so passionate about something that you would be willing to stand in the path of an unstoppable force? We're often told to pick our battles, to accept when we're outmatched. But what if the one thing you're fighting for is the only thing you have left? What if your greatest enemy is secretly the answer to a prayer you gave up on long ago? This is the unbelievable story of how a woman who blocked a bulldozer did more than just save a building. She saw a scar on its powerful owner that unmasked her lost brother. Get ready for a story that proves destiny has a shocking, and sometimes brutal, sense of humor. On one side, you have Allison Reed, a woman whose heart is anchored to the memories of a community building, the last place that feels like home. On the other, the ruthless billionaire Miles Alexander, a man who sees the past as rubble and progress as the only thing worth building. He has everything money can buy, but he has no memory of who he was. She has nothing but a memory, and she's about to find out it's the key to everything. The stage for our story is a tense standoff, a single woman against a massive machine. But believe me, the conflict you see on the surface is nothing compared to the emotional plot twist brewing beneath. We believe that money can solve any problem, right? Well, Allison is about to prove that some things are priceless, and in doing so, she'll trigger a chain of events so shocking, so heart-aching, it will challenge everything you think you know about fate and family reunion. This isn't just a story about overcoming a corporate giant. It's about how a hidden scar can hold more truth than a vault full of secrets. It's the story of how a woman's desperate act to protect her past leads her straight to the man who was the biggest missing piece of it. She stood in front of his bulldozer to stop him, only to discover a mark that would unravel a secret and unmask the one person she thought was gone forever, her lost brother. So get comfortable, because you are about to go on an incredible emotional journey. Before we dive in, tell us what beautiful city you're watching from right now. We want to know how far our story has reached. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss powerful stories like this, and please, share this with someone you think will be touched by this incredible tale of destiny. Well, isn't this just a picture? There she was, Allison Reed, standing like a lone warrior against a metal giant. The engine of the massive yellow bulldozer rumbled, a deep-throated growl that vibrated through the very pavement beneath her feet, almost like a hungry beast eager for its meal. But Allison didn't flinch, not even a little. It was a testament to her spirit, a raw, unwavering force against a tide of cold, hard progress. She was, for all intents and purposes, a beautiful stubborn fly in the ointment of a very powerful man. From the tinted window of his disgustingly expensive car, the billionaire, Miles Alexander, watched the scene unfold with a simmering rage. Honestly, who did this woman think she was? It was just another building, another project, another Tuesday. Had built an empire by not letting trivial things like sentiment stand in his way. Feelings didn't build skyscrapers. After all, this whole ordeal was just a tiny, irritating blip on his radar, a nuisance he expected to squash before his afternoon coffee grew cold. He couldn't care less about her reasons. But for Allison, this wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about ghosts and echoes. This place was the last bastion of her childhood, a sanctuary holding the faded memories of her family and, more importantly, of her lost brother. Every corner held a whisper of his laughter, a ghost of his presence. The fight was deeply emotional, a desperate attempt at overcoming a void that had haunted her for years. It was a battle fueled by a secret promise she'd made to herself long ago. The air between them crackled, a silent, charged war of wills. The construction workers stood around awkwardly, hands on their hips, unsure how to proceed. It felt like a moment suspended in time, a strange convergence of two worlds that should never have collided. You could almost say it was destiny, though. The true nature of their connection remained unmasked, hidden beneath layers of anger and grief. This was more than a protest, it was a confrontation of souls, a surprise to everyone watching. Miles gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. The audacity of her defiance was utterly shocking. He was a man who moved mountains, who reshaped city skylines with the stroke of a pen, and yet, here was one woman, with nothing but conviction in her eyes, stopping his multi-million-dollar bulldozer in its tracks. A strange, unfamiliar feeling flickered within him, something other than pure fury, but he crushed it instantly. This was business, plain and simple. Allison, however, stood her ground, her resolve as solid as the concrete she was protecting. She wasn't just fighting a machine, she was fighting to keep a memory alive, to honor a past that felt stolen. In her pocket, her fingers found the worn edges of an old photograph, a silent source of her strength. This was for him. Little did she know, this single act of defiance was the first tremor of an earthquake, a plot twist that would shake the very foundations of both their lives, long before any hope of a family reunion. Miles Alexander didn't become a self-made billionaire by being sentimental. To him, the world was a chessboard, and he played to win, always. This old community building wasn't a landmark, it was a poorly placed pawn on his path to checkmate, an obstacle to be cleared for his next gleaming luxury high-rise. He saw progress in demolition, beauty in concrete and steel, and profit in replacing the old with the new. This whole protest was, in his mind, utterly ridiculous, a trivial nuisance slowing down the inevitable march of progress. He envisioned a shining tower of glass reaching for the sky, a monument to his own success and ambition. The passionate pleas of a few locals were just white noise, the buzzing of insects before the might of his bulldozer. What did they know of ambition? What did they understand about building a legacy? Their little world of bake sales and bingo. Nights was about to be replaced by penthouses with panoramic views, and frankly, he saw it as an upgrade for the entire neighborhood. Their resistance was an annoyance, nothing more. Any opposition was simply a line item in his budget, a problem to be solved with money or with force. He viewed their emotional attachment as a weakness, a flaw he could exploit. The concept of a place holding memories was foreign to him. His own past was a blank slate, a secret he never cared to investigate. So why should theirs be any different? He was a man who looked forward, never back. The past was rubble, and he was the one holding the wrecking ball, ready for the overcoming of old structures. Head dealt with bigger hurdles, crushed more significant resistance. The small-town drama was almost insulting in its simplicity. Head instruct his legal team to tighten the screws, to make them feel the full weight of his influence. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. His plans were set in stone, his vision absolute. The building would come down, and this woman, this Allison Reed, would learn that you can't stand in the way of a force of nature like Miles Alexander. It was a simple, unavoidable fact. The whispers of a community's history meant nothing against the roar of his engines. He saw their fight for preservation as a quaint, but ultimately doomed effort. He had the power, the resources, and the utter lack of sentimentality required to see this through. This project was another step in his relentless climb, and he wouldn't let a ghost story about a lost brother or any other sob story derail him. The only destiny that mattered was the one he forged for himself with his own two hands. In his mind, the path was clear. The building was already gone, replaced by the gleam of his architectural masterpiece. The protesters were a distant memory, their signs and chants faded into irrelevance. He just needed to go through the motions, apply the right amount of pressure, and watch them scatter. The first step, he decided, would be a direct one. He would confront the ringleader, Allison, and make her an offer she couldn't possibly refuse. After all, everyone had a price. But Allison Reed was fighting for something far more precious than real estate. She had grown up in the shadow of that community, building, its worn halls echoing with the last vestiges of a happy childhood. It was where her mother taught her to paint, where her father held community barbecues, and most painfully, it was the last place she remembered seeing her brother. The last place that held any tangible connection to the boy who had vanished from her life, leaving a gaping scar on her soul. This fight wasn't just about preserving a structure, it was a desperate act of preservation for her own heart. To let that bulldozer tear it down felt like a second betrayal, like erasing the final faded footprint of her lost brother. In her dreams, she still saw him, a little boy with a mischievous grin, and the thought of a family reunion was a fragile, secret hope she clung to in her darkest moments. This building was the only anchor to that hope, as irrational as it seemed. The community rallied around her, inspired by her fierce emotional determination. They saw a leader, a woman of integrity, fighting for their shared history, but they couldn't see the deeper wound that fueled her. They didn't know that with every poster she hung, with every speech she gave, she was screaming into a void, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the universe would hear her plea. It was a battle for memory itself, a struggle of overcoming a grief that had defined most of her life. She led the protests with a fire that surprised even herself. This was more than a cause, it was a calling. It was as if her entire life had been leading to this one standoff, this one moment of defiance against a faceless billionaire who saw only dollar signs. She couldn't let him win. Letting him win meant letting go of the last piece of her brother she had left. It was a deeply personal war waged on a very public stage, and she was prepared to see it through to the bitter end. Every brick of that building was sacred to her. She could trace the lines in the mortar and remember stories, moments, feelings. To Miles Alexander, it was an obsolete structure. To Allison, it was a living museum of a life that was of a family that was whole. The thought of it being reduced to rubble was a physical pain, a shocking prospect that she refused to accept. The building stood as a silent witness to her family's story, including the yet unmasked truth of what happened. So while Miles Alexander plotted his next move from a world of cold, hard cash, Allison Reed stood guard over a treasure that had no price tag. She was protecting more than just a building. She was protecting the faint, flickering ember of hope. A hope that one day, a miracle would happen, a plot twist orchestrated by destiny itself. A hope that her brother was still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found, and that hope was worth more than any skyscraper. Just as he planned, Miles approached her, exuding an aura of untouchable power and wealth. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Small talk was for the powerless. He strode right up to Allison, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, and presented a check with an astronomical number of zeros. "This should cover your sentimental value," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Now be a good girl and step aside. Let the men do their work." It was a gesture designed to belittle, to reduce her fight to a simple transaction. For a moment, there was a heavy silence. The construction crew watched, expecting her to gasp, to perhaps even cry with relief. It was more money than any of them would see in a lifetime. But Allison simply looked at the check, then up at the smug face of the billionaire. A slow, defiant fire ignited in her eyes. This man, this empty vessel of ambition, truly understood nothing. He thought he could buy her grief, put a price on her brother's memory. The arrogance of it was shocking. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion that spoke volumes, she took the check from his hand. He smiled, thinking he had won. But she didn't put it in her pocket. Instead, she ripped it in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the ground like dead leaves. "My memories are not for sale," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with the force of a thunderclap. "You can buy a soul, Mr. Alexander. You can put a price on a lost brother." Miles's face was a mask of disbelief, the smirk wiped clean away. He was speechless. No one had ever refused his money. No one had ever looked him in the eye and chosen memory over millions. It was a plot twist he hadn't anticipated, a move that wasn't in his playbook. For the first time in a very long time, Miles Alexander felt a crack in his armor of cold indifference. It was a deeply unsettling, emotional jolt to his perfectly ordered world, a surprise that left him momentarily stunned. He stared at the torn pieces of paper at her feet, then back at her face. Her integrity was like a physical blow. It was an overcoming of his primary weapon wealth. This wasn't a business negotiation anymore, it had become something personal. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury rise within him, hotter than before. He had tried to be civil, in his own way. He had offered her a golden parachute, and she had torn it to shreds in his face. The secret to her resolve was stronger than he imagined. The standoff was no longer about a building. It was a clash of two fundamental beliefs: that everything has a price, and that some things are priceless. Allison had drawn her line in the sand, not with anger, but with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. And as Miles stalked back to his car, fuming, he knew one thing for certain: the gloves were off. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one far bigger than she could ever imagine. Frustration was an emotion Miles Alexander rarely indulged in, but Allison Reed was pushing him to his limit. His generous offer, an offer that could have changed her life forever, had been thrown back in his face. Her unwavering integrity was not something he admired, it was an obstacle. And his patience for obstacles was wearing dangerously thin. If she wouldn't be bought, she would be broken. It was time to escalate, to move beyond simple offers and into the realm of overwhelming force. He unleashed his legal team, a pack of sharks who smelled blood in the water. Within days, the community was served with a flurry of legal notices, cease and desist orders, trespassing warnings, and finally, a cold official document posted on the community building's door, a final demolition warning. The date was set, the clock was ticking. The friendly neighborhood dispute was now a full-blown legal war, and Miles was bringing out the heavy artillery. The mood in the community shifted from hopeful defiance to a palpable sense of dread. The legal jargon was intimidating, the threat of fines and arrests terrifying. Miles was strategically turning up the heat, hoping to boil away their resolve. He knew that fear was a powerful motivator, often more effective than money. He was isolating Allison, trying to make her supporters see the fight as a lost cause, an act of overcoming that was simply impossible against a man of his stature. But Allison refused to be intimidated. She saw the legal notices not as a defeat, but as a sign of desperation from the billionaire. He was angry because he couldn't control her, because his power had failed to corrupt her. She worked tirelessly, staying up late with pro bono lawyers, trying to find a loophole, a delay, anything to buy them more time. The fight became more emotional, fueled by the community's growing fear and her own deep-seated need to protect her brother's memory, her lost brother. This was his classic move, a corporate bulldozer in the form of paperwork and legal threats. He aimed to crush their spirit long before the real machine arrived. He wanted them to feel hopeless, to give up before the final battle was even waged. It was a cruel, calculated strategy, designed to dismantle their unity and leave Allison standing alone. He was confident this would be the final nail in the coffin of their little protest. The destiny of that building was sealed. He watched, from his office high above the city, a modern-day king in his castle, as the news reports trickled in. He saw the worried faces, the anxious whispers. Everything was proceeding as planned. The town hall meeting scheduled for that week would be their last gasp, a final futile display of emotion before the inevitable. He almost felt a twinge of pity, almost. They had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the shocking finality he was about to bring down upon them. The town hall meeting was electric, the air thick with desperation and a sliver of defiance. It felt like the community's last stand. Allison took the podium, not as a polished politician, but as a daughter of the neighborhood, her voice shaking, but clear. She spoke of shared memories, of the building's role as the heart of their community. But then, her speech took a deeply personal, emotional turn that hushed the entire room. A turn that was an unexpected plot twist for the proceedings. She spoke of her lost brother. She didn't just mention him, she painted a picture of him. A vibrant, happy little boy who loved to hide in the building's old library, who believed the janitor's closet was a secret portal to another world. Her words were raw and filled with a longing that was almost tangible. It was a heart-aching confession of a grief she had carried for so long, a secret sorrow now laid bare for all to see. The fight was for him, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. Miles was there, standing at the back of the room, an arrogant spectator at their final plea. Had come to witness their defeat firsthand. He listened with a detached amusement, ready to dismiss it all as pathetic, sentimental drivel. But as Allison spoke of her brother, something strange happened. Her words, her story, it struck a weird, forgotten chord deep within him. It was a faint, dissonant echo in a part of his mind he thought was completely empty, a part he never explored. He felt a bizarre and unwelcome flicker of something, a connection, a memory. It was impossible. He had no memory of his life before the age of 5, before his adoption. His past was a void, a story had never had any interest in uncovering. Yet, the way she described the boy's laugh, the specific details of a game they used to play, it felt unnervingly familiar. A shocking and disorienting feeling began to creep over him, a sense that some part of her story was unmasked from his own forgotten history. For a fleeting second, he felt an inexplicable pang of loss, of something missing. It was an alien emotion. For the self-assured billionaire. He quickly shook it off, attributing it to the charged atmosphere, the manipulative power of a good sob story. He was Miles Alexander. He was not moved by tears or tales of childhood ghosts. His resolve hardened again, his face an impassive mask. This changed nothing. The bulldozer was still scheduled for dawn. Still, the feeling lingered, an unsettling hum beneath the surface of his consciousness. Allison's speech hadn't saved her building, but it had planted a tiny, microscopic seed of doubt in the barren soil of Miles's mind. It was a seed that he would aggressively ignore, but it was there nonetheless. As he left the meeting, the image of Allison's tear-streaked face and the story of her brother followed him out into the cold night, a haunting prelude to the destiny that awaited them all. Dawn broke cold and gray, the kind of morning that feels heavy with finality. The day of the demolition had arrived. True to his nature, Miles Alexander came in person to oversee it. He wasn't the type of billionaire to delegate a victory lap. He wanted to be there, to watch the last flicker of resistance die out, to see his powerful bulldozer finally tear into the building that had caused him so much aggravation. It was a display of ultimate power, a message to the entire city. He stood apart from the crowd, a tailored suit, his armor against the raw emotion radiating from the protesters. His face was a mask of cold determination, his posture rigid and unyielding. This was the final act, the culmination of his will against theirs. He was here to crush the last bit of their hope, to personally witness the overcoming of their futile efforts. For him, this was more than demolition, it was the reassertion of order, his order. The giant machine rumbled to life, its engine a deafening roar that drowned out the protesters' chants. It was an intimidating, terrifying sound, a promise of the destruction to come. The operator, a man who just wanted to do his job, looked nervously towards Miles, waiting for the signal. The police formed a line, creating a barrier between the defiant community and the instrument of their defeat. The tension was a razor's edge, ready to snap at any moment. This was it. The point of no return. Miles felt a grim satisfaction. He had weathered their legal challenges, ignored their emotional pleas, and now he was here to finish it. The story of the lost brother, The strange feeling from the town hall had buried it deep. It was a momentary weakness, a bizarre surprise he refused to analyze. Today was about strength, about proving that sentiment has no place in the world. Of progress and power. He looked towards the front of the crowd, expecting to see their leader, Allison, with a look of resignation on her face. He expected tears, perhaps a final shouted insult. He expected her to finally accept the inevitable destiny he had laid out for her and her precious community building. He was ready for the end of this annoying chapter, a chapter that had been a shocking waste of his valuable time and energy. But what he saw was not defeat, it was something else entirely. Allison Reed was not in the crowd. She had broken past the police line. She was standing where she had stood that very first day, directly in the path of the bulldozer. She was making her last stand, a final, desperate act of defiance that would trigger a plot twist no one, least of all him, could have ever seen coming. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. There she stood, a solitary figure of defiance against the roaring metal beast. Allison refused to move from the bulldozer's path, her body a fragile human shield. Her stance was not one of aggression, but of profound, heartbreaking resolve. She wasn't just blocking a machine. She was protecting the last physical piece of her past, the last sanctuary of memory for her lost brother. Her action created a tense, unbearable standoff, a silent scream that was louder than any chant. The scene was pure drama, and it didn't take long for the media to descend like vultures. Cameras started flashing, reporters shouted questions, and live feeds began broadcasting the image across the city. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local dispute anymore. It was a lead story: the lone woman versus the ruthless billionaire. The narrative was irresistible, a modern-day David and Goliath. The public attention was a surprise Miles hadn't counted on, an unwelcome complication to his carefully orchestrated finale. He watched, his jaw tight with fury, as his private demolition became a public spectacle. This woman was a master of theatrics. He thought bitterly. She was turning his victory into a circus. The pressure was mounting. Every second that Bulldozer idled was a second his reputation was being painted in a more villainous light. He had to end this, and he had to end it now. This emotional display had gone on long enough. It was time for the overcoming of this final, stubborn obstacle. The police were hesitant to move in, aware of the rolling cameras. They tried to reason with her, their voices calm but firm. "Ma'am, you need to move. You'll be arrested." But Allison didn't even seem to hear them. Her eyes were locked on Miles, a silent, pleading challenge in her gaze. It was a look that said, "Do you have any humanity left at all?" It was a look that carried the weight of the secret she was unknowingly about to share. For Miles, this was the ultimate humiliation. His authority was being challenged on live television. Her defiance was no longer just an annoyance, it was a direct attack on his image. He was a man who controlled everything, and he was losing control in the most public way imaginable. The situation was spiraling, creating a plot twist in the days, events that he could not have foreseen. The destiny of this moment felt suddenly uncertain, teetering on a knife's edge. He had to act. He couldn't let her win this war of optics. The apathetic, powerful billionaire was being unmasked as a bully on every screen in the city. With a sharp, angry gesture, he signaled to his own private security team. The police were too slow, too soft. He needed this situation handled immediately, before it did any more damage. "Get her out of there," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care how." With Miles's direct order, his security team moved in. They were large, imposing men in sharp suits, a stark contrast to the local police. They bypassed the hesitant officers and converged on Allison, their faces grim and professional. They were there to do a job: remove the obstacle. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath as the situation escalated from a tense standoff to a physical confrontation. The air crackled with the promise of violence, a truly shocking turn of events. Allison didn't fight back in a violent way, but she planted her feet, becoming dead weight, a silent protest against their force. The men grabbed her arms, their grips firm and unforgiving, and began to pull her away from the path of the bulldozer. It was an ugly struggle, a raw display of brute force against quiet conviction. In the ensuing scuffle to haul her away, one of the guards yanked her arm hard, causing her to stumble sideways into Miles, who had moved closer to oversee the removal. The impact was minor, but in the chaos, her flailing hand caught the lapel of his expensive, custom-tailored suit jacket. There was a sickening sound of ripping fabrica sound that, on any other day, would have sent Miles into a cold rage over the destruction of a $5,000 garment. But the tear wasn't the significant part. It was what the torn sleeve revealed. That changed the course of destiny forever. This was the moment the universe had been waiting for. As the sleeve of his jacket was torn away, a prominent, jagged scar on his forearm was exposed to the daylight. It wasn't a small mark, it was an old, angry-looking cicatrix that ran from his wrist halfway to his elbow. It was a mark of deep, past trauma, a physical reminder of a pain he couldn't even remember. It was a secret his own body had been keeping. From him his entire adult life, a part of his unknown history, suddenly, violently, unmasked. The world seemed to slow down. The shouting of the crowd, the rumble of the engine, the frantic energy of the momentum all faded into a muffled hum. Miles himself barely registered the torn suit, momentarily confused by the sudden exposure of his own skin, of that old, familiar mark, had never given a second thought. Had had it for as long as he could remember, a meaningless feature of his body, like a birthmark. It held no emotional weight for him, but it held the weight of the world for someone else. In the midst of being dragged away, Allison's struggles ceased abruptly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and a dawning, earth-shattering recognition, were fixated on his arm. It wasn't just any scar. It was the scar, the one that had haunted her memories, the one she had last traced with her own small fingers as a child, right before her lost brother disappeared forever. This was the ultimate, impossible plot twist. Everything stopped for Allison. The hands gripping her arms, the yelling, the looming threat of the bulldozer, all dissolved into an insignificant blur. She stopped struggling, her body going completely limp, but her eyes were fiercely alive, locked onto the jagged white line on Miles Alexander's forearm. She was completely frozen, suspended in a moment of shocking, heart-stopping disbelief. Time itself seemed to bend around this single impossible point of focus. It couldn't be. And yet, it was. The scar was identical. Not similar, identical. The way it curved just above the wrist, the small, puckered indentation near the elbow, every detail was seared into her memory, a permanent fixture in the mental image of her lost brother. It was the unique, unforgettable mark from the accident, the terrible day that had separated them, the day her world had split in two. It was a brand of shared trauma, a secret map of their past. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the senseless. Miles Alexander, the cold, ruthless billionaire who was trying to destroy the last piece of her past. How could he be the one? How could the villain of her present be the hero of her childhood memories? It was a plot twist so profound, so utterly mind-bending, that it felt like a hallucination, a cruel trick played by a grieving mind pushed to its absolute limit. It was a possibility that was too painful, too beautiful to comprehend. The security guards, confused by her sudden stillness, loosened their grip slightly. They exchanged puzzled glances, unsure what had just happened. Miles himself looked down at his own arm, then at her staring, transfixed face, a flicker of irritation mixed with confusion in his eyes. "What is it now?" he started to say, but the words died in his throat when he saw the look on her face. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was something else entirely. Something ancient and deeply emotional. She saw it all in a flash: a tall tree, a broken branch, a panicked cry. A memory so vivid it was like a lightning strike to her soul. She could almost feel the rough bark under her own small hands, see the terror in her brother's eyes. The scar wasn't just a mark on his skin, it was a scar on her life, a constant physical reminder of her failure to keep him safe, of the moment destiny had cruelly intervened and torn them apart. And now here it was, unmasked, right in front of her, on the arm of her greatest enemy. The man who held the power to erase her past was impossibly the very past she was fighting to hold on to. The hope of a family reunion, a fantasy she had all but abandoned, suddenly felt terrifyingly, breathtakingly real. The world held its breath, waiting for the silence to break. The roaring chaos of the scene had faded into a vacuum of silence, at least in Allison's world. There was only the roaring in her own ears and the sight of that impossible scar. Her lips parted, but at first, no sound came out. It was as if her voice couldn't grasp the enormity of what her eyes were seeing. The security men were still holding her, but their grip was now uncertain, their purpose lost in this strange, quiet moment that had hijacked the day's brutal agenda. Then she spoke. It wasn't a shout or a cry. It was a whisper, a hushed breath of a sound that was nearly swallowed by the air, but somehow cut through the engine's rumble with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She uttered a name, a single word, a childhood nickname that had been buried for decades, a secret code known only to two people on the entire planet, a little girl and her beloved older brother. Milo, she breathed. The name hung in the air between them, shimmering with the ghosts of forgotten laughter and scraped knees. It was a name that belonged to tree forts and shared ice creams, not to boardrooms and demolition sites. It was a sound from another lifetime, a key to a locked room in her heart. For anyone else listening, it was a meaningless syllable. But for Allison, it was an act of faith, a desperate prayer sent out into the universe, hoping for a miracle. Miles Alexander, the powerful billionaire, the man who commanded armies of lawyers and builders, heard it. And the effect was instantaneous and profound. It was as if the name bypassed his ears and his brain and shot directly into the deepest, most forgotten part of his soul. It was a word that held a resonance he couldn't explain, a warmth that was both alien and deeply, achingly familiar. He didn't just hear the name, he felt it. This was the ultimate plot twist, delivered not with a bang, but with a whisper. A single word held the power to stop a bulldozer, to freeze a man of action, and to potentially rewrite two entire lives. The name echoed in the silence, a fragile bridge across a chasm of lost years and mistaken identities. It was the most emotional, most terrifying, and most hopeful sound Allison had ever uttered. She watched his face, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. Would he recognize it? Or would he dismiss it, breaking the last fragile thread of hope she had? The entire world seemed to shrink to the space between them, waiting for his reaction. The secret of the lost brother was no longer hers alone, it was out in the open, waiting to be claimed or denied. Miles froze. It wasn't a conscious decision, his body simply stopped responding to his commands. The name Milo echoed in a part of his mind he thought was empty, a vast, dark chamber of forgotten years. It was like someone had suddenly struck a match in that darkness, revealing a flash of an image, a feeling, a ghost of a memory that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He was a man who lived in the solid, tangible world, but this felt like something from a dream. The name vibrated through him, a strange, forgotten frequency. He was Miles Alexander. He had built his identity from the ground up, a fortress of success and ambition. But he had always known, on some level, that he was built on a hollow foundation. He was adopted. His life, as he knew it, began at the age of 5. Before that, nothing. A complete and total blank. A narrative his adoptive parents could never fill because they didn't know it either. He had never cared about his life before. The past was irrelevant, a non-factor in his equation for success. Why look back at a void when the future held so much promise? He saw his lack of history as a strength and unburdening. He was self-made in the truest sense of the word. But now this woman, this protester, had spoken a name that felt more real, more a part of him than Miles ever had. It was a shocking, disorienting sensation. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. The desperation in her eyes, the tears welling up. It wasn't a performance. It was genuine. This was no trick. This was something real, something that connected to the great secret of his own existence, the question of his origin that he had so diligently ignored. The name she spoke felt like a key, and for the first time in his life, he felt it terrifying. Curiosity about the door it might unlock. The world around them was in a state of suspended animation. The security guards looked at him, awaiting orders, but he gave none. The bulldozer operator had cut the engine's throttle to an idle, sensing the profound shift in the atmosphere. The media cameras were still rolling, capturing every nuance of this bizarre, silent drama. The powerful billionaire looked utterly lost, a man suddenly adrift in his own life story. Could it be possible? Could this woman, his sworn adversary, hold the missing pages of his life? The idea was absurd, a plot twist worthy of a cheap novel. And yet the name, Milo, it felt like home in a way he couldn't comprehend. The fortress he had built around himself was beginning to crumble, not from an outside attack, but from a single word that had somehow found a crack in the foundation. With tears now streaming freely down her face, Allison took a hesitant step forward. The security guards, looking to a frozen Miles for direction, let her go. Her voice was still quiet, but it was filled with the conviction of absolute truth. "You got that scar," she began, her gaze fixed on his forearm, "the summer you turned 5. We were climbing the big oak tree behind the old library. You always dared me to go higher, you fearless boy." She didn't wait for him to respond. The story tumbled out of her, a memory preserved perfectly in the amber of her grief. A branch snapped. You fell. You landed on that rusty piece of old farm equipment someone had left in the tall grass. Every word painted a picture so vivid that Miles could almost smell the cut grass and feel the summer sun. It was a story he had never ever heard, yet it felt like she was describing a scene from his own phantom limb of a past. "I was so scared," Allison continued, her voice cracking with the remembered terror of a little girl. "There was so much blood. I held your arm right here," she gestured, her finger hovering over the air just above his scar. "And I sang you this stupid song about the little monkeys, because it was the only thing I could think of to stop you from crying." It was a detail so specific, so intimate, so incredibly heart-aching that it defied all logic. Miles stood as if turned to stone, the world tilting on its axis. He was listening to the origin story of a mark on his own body, told by a complete stranger. His adoptive parents had told him they didn't know how had gotten it. It was there when they met him. It was a part of his physical self that had no history, no narrative. And now, this woman was narrating his own past to him with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. It was the most shocking moment of his life. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place with terrifying speed. Her emotional speech at the town hall, her fierce protection of this specific place, her impossible knowledge of a nickname and a scar. It wasn't a series of coincidences, it was a story. Their story. The great secret of his life was being unmasked, not by private investigators or DNA tests, but by the shared memory of a childhood trauma. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The anger, the ambition, the fortune, it all felt ridiculously insignificant in the face of this revelation. This woman wasn't just a protester, she wasn't an obstacle. She was a witness to a life he had lived but could not remember, a life where he wasn't Miles the billionaire. He was Milo, a little boy who fell from a tree. Shaken to his absolute core, Miles slowly lifted his gaze from the jagged scar on his arm to Allison's face. It was like looking at her for the very first time. Before, he had seen only an adversary, a stubborn woman, an obstacle. Now he saw something else entirely. He saw the faint echo of her features in his own, a similarity he had been utterly blind to, a truth his anger had refused to let him see. He saw it in the shape of her eyes, the same intense, deep-set eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. He saw it in the stubborn set of her jaw, a trait he recognized as his own sign of determination. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a stranger. He was seeing an undeniable family resemblance, a genetic fingerprint that had been staring him in the face all along. The reality of it was a physical blow, leaving him breathless. The puzzle wasn't just clicking into place, it was complete. Allison Reed, his protester, his enemy. She was the little girl from the story. She was the owner of the other half of his forgotten past. This shocking, impossible, earth-shattering realization settled over him, not with a whisper, but with the force of a tidal wave. She was his sister, and that made him her lost brother. The word brother echoed in the silent, empty chambers of his mind. It was a title, an identity he had never possessed. He was an only child in his adoptive family. To think that all this time, a sister had been out there, grieving for him, fighting for a memory of him, it was an emotional weight almost too heavy to bear. The life he had built, the identity he had so carefully constructed, suddenly felt like a lie. He looked around at the scene, at the silent crowd, the waiting bulldozer, the media. This was the arena where he had intended to demonstrate his ultimate power. Instead, it had become the stage for the most vulnerable, humbling moment of his life. His entire world had been turned upside down by a plot twist so profound it bordered on the divine. This was destiny in its most raw and powerful form, a force he had always dismissed but could no longer deny. All the anger he had felt towards her vanished, replaced by a flood of emotions he couldn't name: confusion, regret, and a deep, aching sorrow for the years they had lost. He, the great Miles Alexander, the self-made billionaire, felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to fix what he had almost broken. The building, the money, the project, it was all meaningless ash. The only thing that mattered was the woman standing before him, her face streaked with tears, reflecting his own unmasked shock. The wave of realization crested over Miles, and for a second, he was paralyzed by the sheer, shocking force of it. His sister, his lost brother. The words spun in his mind, rewriting decades of his life in an instant. The rumble of the bulldozer engine, which had been a sound of triumph just minutes ago, was now a monstrous grating noise, a threat against the last link to a past he just discovered he had. It had to stop. Action snapped back into his limbs. His paralysis broke, replaced by a sudden fierce urgency. He spun around, his eyes wild, searching for the operator in the cab of the machine. The whole world had narrowed to a single desperate objective: silence that engine. He couldn't let it run for one more second. It felt like a countdown to desecrating a sacred site, a place that now held the ghost of their shared childhood. Cut the engine. The command ripped from his throat, a raw, powerful shout that was utterly devoid of his usual cold composure. It was not the voice of the calm, calculating billionaire. It was the panicked, desperate cry of a man who had just found something priceless and was terrified of seeing it destroyed. Shut it down, now. The force of his own voice surprised him, an emotional eruption that stunned everyone within earshot. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the entire scene. The operator, wide-eyed and confused by the plot twist, immediately killed the engine. The deafening roar died with a final wheezing gasp, leaving an eerie, ringing quiet in its wake. The only sound was the distant city traffic and the wind whispering around the silent machine. Every single person, protesters, the police, his own security, the media stood frozen, staring at Miles Alexander in utter disbelief. He had been the one pushing for this, the unstoppable force. And now he was the one who had stopped it all. With a single frantic command, it made no sense. He looked back at Allison, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Her face was a mixture of hope and confusion, her eyes asking the question that was on everyone's mind: what was happening? What had changed? This sudden reversal was the greatest surprise of all. Miles didn't have the words to explain, not yet. The truth was too new, too immense to be spoken aloud in this chaotic arena. He just knew, with every fiber of his being, that he couldn't let that bulldozer move another inch. He had spent his life building an empire of steel and glass, but in that moment, he realized he had almost demolished the only thing that had ever truly mattered: the foundation of his own identity, the hope of a family reunion. In the aftermath of that shocking command, Miles Alexander moved with a speed and purpose no one had ever seen from him. The raw, emotional energy of his discovery was channeled into an obsessive quest for the truth. He unleashed his immense resources not to build or demolish, but to excavate his own past. Fleets of private investigators, genealogists, and researchers were hired, tasked with one mission: to uncover the story of a little boy named Milo, who had a sister named Allison and a telltale scar. It didn't take long. The paper trail, cold for decades, warmed quickly under the heat of a billionaire's fortune. Adoption records were unsealed, hospital archives were searched, and social service files were unearthed. The truth, when it came, was unequivocal, laid out in black and white. He was, without a shadow of a doubt, Allison's lost brother, separated from her after the accident and lost in a bureaucratic system that had failed them both. The secret was finally, officially, unmasked. The first thing he did was cancel the demolition. The bulldozer was removed, the legal notices were withdrawn, and a public announcement was made that the community building would be preserved. But he didn't stop there. This wasn't just about stopping a wrong, it was about creating a right. He established a foundation in their family's name, Reed Foundation, and dedicated millions to not only restore the community center, but to revitalize the entire neighborhood, a testament to the overcoming of a dark past. But the most important part of his new project had nothing to do with money or buildings. It was the family reunion. It happened quietly, away from the prying eyes of the media. He met Allison not as a developer, but as a brother. There were tears, of course, and decades of questions to be answered. They talked for hours, piecing together the two halves of their lives, finding echoes of each other in their separate journeys. It was an awkward, beautiful, and profoundly heartaching reconciliation. Their destiny, it seemed, was not to be enemies, but to find their way back to each other in the most dramatic way imaginable. The standoff that had started with such anger and bitterness had ended in the most incredible plot twist. A reunion that healed not just the rift between them, but the deep wounds within them both. Miles found the history he never knew he was missing, and Allison found the brother she never believed she would see again. He was no longer just Miles Alexander, the ruthless tycoon. He was Milo, a brother who had finally come home. And together, they stood in front of the community, building not as adversaries, but as family, ready to build a new future on the sacred ground of their past. The journey had been painful, the discovery shocking, but the final quiet piece of their reunion was a treasure greater than any fortune he had ever amassed. What an absolutely incredible story. It just goes to show that sometimes the universe has a plan so much bigger and more intricate than we could ever imagine. We started with a woman standing against a bulldozer, a simple act of defiance, and ended with a family being reborn from the ashes of a forgotten past. It's a powerful reminder that underneath the roles we play, the ruthless billionaire, the stubborn protestor, are all just human beings searching for connection, for a place to call home. The journey of Allison and Miles is a true testament to the power of memory and the unbreakable bonds of family. A single scar, a mark of trauma, became a bridge across decades of separation. It transformed an enemy into a lost brother and a bitter fight over property into a heart-aching family reunion. Their story forces us to ask ourselves what secrets are hidden in our own lives, waiting for the right moment to be unmasked. What connections have we missed that are right in front of our eyes? We are so deeply moved by this story of overcoming and destiny, and we know you are too. We would love to hear what part of this journey impacted you the most. Was it Allison's unwavering courage? Was it the shocking moment Miles ordered the engine to be cut? Or was it the quiet, final reunion? Please let us know in the comments below. Did you expect a different ending, or did you love the heart-aching way their story concluded? Your thoughts and feelings are what make this community so special. If this story touched you, please give this video a like and be sure to follow our channel for more incredible content. And don't forget to explore our older videos. There are so many amazing stories waiting for you. We can't wait to see you on the next one.